This summer that they're calling Black Summer here in Australia has changed me profoundly. I have woken up, not spiritually, though it is kind of spiritual as well, because it's awareness. It's just awareness of what's happening. And here in Australia this summer, a lot of us have become aware that this sort of vague idea of climate change is not something that's going to maybe happen in the future. It is affecting us now. So I've been looking into this whole process of, waking up to the reality of climate change, and there are stages that you go through, from sort of denying that there's any problem. And there's lots of reasons for that. People put their heads in the sand for, because they don't want to face what's actually quite inconvenient, uncomfortable. And then there's this process of becoming concerned, and then becoming a little bit more concerned. And then there's the moment at which you wake up to the reality. And for a lot of us here in Australia this Black Summer, we had those moments. We had moments that we can remember, that we can say, that was it, that was when. For me, it was when I looked at my phone app, the Fires Near Me app, which showed me how the fires were moving. And there was one moving towards our property, and it jumped the river, so we were on alert. And it was getting closer and closer. But, it was travelling a little bit every day, so we thought we had time. And of course we hoped it would rain before it got to us, but there was no rain on the horizon at that time. And then we looked at the app just before we went to bed, and the fire had jumped in the last hour about 10 kilometres. It had just eaten up 10 kilometres. The fire was 20 kilometres away from us at the time, and we suddenly realised it's hot out there. It's incredibly dry. The wind is blowing from that direction. That fire could be on us in a couple of hours, and we just went. And we also got an email from our local fire chief who said, you should be packing. You should leave in the morning. So we packed up, and that moment of realizing that, shit, this was happening to us too. And we looked at our property and we knew that if the fire came, we would not have a house to come back to. Our property is surrounded by rainforest, but as we discovered this year, the rainforest can burn too. We don't usually get fires where we are. It's not usually a problem for us because the rainforest is damp. Not this year. Not this year. And so hubby said, oh, well, we've got a trailer. We can throw a whole lot of stuff in the trailer. I mean, there was no way that we could come back to a house that was standing. Our house is what's called indefensible. It's up a road that's only got one way in. There's no other way that you can get out. So the rural fire service, they won't put their people into areas where there's only one way out for obvious reasons. And people like us, we're supposed to just leave as soon as possible. If you wanted to stay and protect your house, you could do that. We had a system. We had a fire hose and a pump and some sprinklers, and we'd set it all up and turned it on and realized it was highly inadequate. So we threw a whole lot of stuff on our trailer and in our cars. And I looked at it and I went, this looks like the pictures that I've seen on the news of Syrian people leaving their lands, refugees, with their trucks loaded up with their belongings. And I just went, wow. And I said, we better put the camping equipment in because we have nowhere to live. both our friends who were also in fire-prone areas, there was no point going there. People that weren't in fire-prone areas, we didn't know them that well. So, yeah, we were just facing, where would we go? Are we going to sleep in our car? What are we going to do? So, we were lucky. The fire actually never got to us. The weather the next day became cool, though there wasn't any rain. It was cool, and that was so much easier to feel calm. And the fires stopped moving. We took our trailer out and parked it where it was safe, but we didn't actually evacuate completely. But we lived with the anxiety, you know, for a few weeks before that, and we've lived with anxiety until now. I've never lived with anxiety before, and just as sort of like constant vigilance that you have to be aware when are you going to have to leave? Is the fire still moving? How fast is it going? All this kind of thing. Staring at apps that show the wind. Oh, we'll be okay tomorrow because the wind's not coming from where the fire is. This kind of stuff. You know, you can sort of sit there and do a bit of meditation and let it all drop, but it doesn't make it go away, you know? So, how did these fires change me? They woke me up. They woke me up to the reality of climate change. They woke me up to the fact that those predictions that we've heard for our future, they sound horrible, they sound scary. But we just experienced the beginning of it. People are saying, oh, this is the new normal. But it's only the beginning. It's only going to get worse from here. The temperatures, we were over 40 degrees Celsius for I don't know how many days it was, but you can't function. I can't function, I mean, outside in that sort of temperature. We were very lucky that my husband had put air conditioning in for this summer. We're on a solar system, a standalone solar system, but we had enough panels so that when the sun's shining, we've actually got excess power so we could run an air conditioner. So on these days, one of the days, we got to nearly 46 degrees. It's just, that was unheard of here. This is a warm, temperate climate, but it's not normally that hot. But on the day that it was so hot, the air conditioners stopped working because our power system went down, because the sun went under a cloud, and I don't know, everything kind of went crazy, and we had to turn the air conditioners off. And it was just like, I can't live in this temperature. How are we going to survive when the predicted days that will be that hot, if the increases can't be kept below a 2-degree increase from before the Industrial Revolution, then in 2075 there will be 300 days a year in what's called the deadly temperature zone. Now, there's only 362 days in a year. It's hard for us to get our heads around that kind of time frame. So I come back from that a little bit. By 2050, where I'll be, if you know I'm still alive, I might be 95, so I could still be here. My daughter will only be 50 something. By then, these numbers of really deadly heat, days of deadly heat, will have increased such that that's what our summers are going to be like. And that's just the heat. You know, and with the heat here comes droughts, comes fire, and there are major water problems because basically because the governments allow corporations to treat water as a commodity and to buy and sell it, and there's not enough water left for the towns and for the farmers who are making our food. Anyway, that's a whole problem, but it's all related. It's all related to the climate changing, because water is, becomes scarce and it's precious. We can't live without it, All of this kind of comes crashing down on you, and I've been reading about it, and I've looked at the science and the predictions, and in actual fact they predicted what happened this year in Australia. There was a report given to the government, and it was quite clear, I've read this report, that by 2020 we are going to be feeling the effects of global warming, such that there would probably be uncontainable bushfires over a large area of southeastern Australia. All of this, Australia has already increased our temperatures by 1 degree. If it goes over 2 degrees, we're basically stuffed. The science is there, you can Google it. What I'm sharing with you today is how this black summer of 2019-2020 in Australia has changed me. Changed me in a very deep way. In that now, everything other than providing some kind of future for my child has faded into insignificance. Because I can see hunger, starvation in my lifetime. And it's really easy because with this drought and with these fires, it's affected our food. So I've been into a supermarket and seen, very little fresh vegetables, and what's there are really expensive. When you have to pay $5 for a lettuce, you realize that, it's actually really easy for food to get scarce. When you wake up to the reality of climate change, there's a period of anger and depression, especially when you look at governments like this present Australian government that's just got their head in the sand. They're complete puppets of the coal industry. They get huge donations from the fossil fuel companies. Huge. They're their main donators. And they dance to their tune. Everything they do is okay by the fossil fuel industry. Nothing that they suggest will stop them or stops them or even makes them think of moderating this aim they have of building more coal mines. It's unbelievable. So you experience a lot of anger, and rightly so, because it's like once you wake up and you see that this is happening, and it's only going to get worse if governments don't act, and you see governments not acting, and Trump's the same. It's like he's peeling back all these environmental protections, and you look at these people, it's like they are single-handedly doing, I was going to say, more than anyone to destroy the world. It's particularly America, because you have so much of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. But in Australia, we dig up the coal and we sell it to other people who then burn it. So even though, we don't have a lot of emissions in terms of the whole world, we do have the highest per capita emissions in the whole world, the highest per person. And we keep digging up coal and sending it to other people, and that's not included in our sort of like percentage of the world's CO2 emissions. Our government cares more about money and power than they do about the future of everybody. It's really depressing. There's an anxiety there. There's an anxiety because you can't, it's like, what do I do? How can I help with this? How can I help prevent it? And as an individual, you feel pretty powerless. And sure, you know, I went to a protest and I'll keep going to protests. But the protests are falling on deaf ears. And so what you can do is you can fall into despair. And we did. My family, my whole family did. We were just completely, well, they call it eco-anxiety. And discovering that there's a name for it, and being able to read, you know, the fact that it's normal and it's actually healthy. You should be anxious about the future because our present way of life cannot survive. It simply can't, because it's all based on growth and we live in a finite world. Just the changes in the environment are going to cause social and economic pressures that our present system, it just won't be able to handle it. So, you know, we truly are looking at the end of civilization as we know it. And just in order to feed ourselves, we will need to be going back to the land, to a more subsistence level, just to keep ourselves fed and alive. And that's freaky. That's frightening. And people don't want to admit that that's a possibility. They don't want to know about it because it's horrifying. But if people don't want to know about it and they put their heads in the sand and they pretend it's not going to happen, or, you know, they pretend that it's just an opinion, not scientific fact. I think the real reason people deny is it's an emotional thing. It's the same with denying the abuse of your llama. It's an emotional thing. You can't handle the truth because it changes the way you perceive yourself. It changes everything. It shakes your world too much. So, you know, people deny it as a kind of protective mechanism for their psyche, I suppose. But of course, just like meditating and letting it all go, it doesn't change anything. It's still coming. It's here. In 1 week here in Australia, we had floods up north, we had fires in the south, we had hail. We had hail in Canberra. I mean, this summer, in some places, the sun never rose. People got up in the morning and they wondered when the sun was going to rise. And they looked at their phones and saw it was 9 a.m. Where's the sun? Oh, the sky is covered with smoke so black that it seems to still be night. In other places, the sky was red from the flames, and I'm sure you've seen the photos. Sometimes we couldn't breathe without breathing apparatuses. The air was so toxic. And where I was, it wasn't even that bad. It was worse in Sydney and in Canberra. They had horrific days. So the horrifying thing is that this is a scenario that's likely to be repeated. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but it will eventually. It will burn again. It may burn every year like this. If it just keeps getting hotter and hotter, why not? I mean, you can either just fall into despair and, you know, feel that it's all too hopeless. So, you know, what can you do? Or you pass into the next stage where you go, all right, you recognize that this is how it's going to be. And you recognize that even though you can join movements and you can try and make your voice heard with the government, and you can do, you know, what you can, that may not prevent this future. But you have to do something, because if you don't do something, it's hopeless. And humans, we can't live with no hope. We have to have some hope for the future. So as individuals, we have to do something. And even while we know that what I as an individual person can do is very small, in terms of the whole world. I have to do it anyway, because if I don't, I'm simply contributing to it. The very least we can do is not make it worse. And that's something, you know, that really is something. The money that I was maybe going to spend going overseas and seeing some of my friends overseas is now going to be spent on a fire bunker and a sprinkler system and a new water tank, an extra water tank for my property, because the future demands that kind of infrastructure. So no overseas holiday. Yeah. Besides, aeroplanes put out an awful lot of CO2. You as an individual can do what you can to help lower your carbon footprint, but more than that, to prepare yourself and your children for a very different future. And that primarily to me means avoiding starvation. To somebody living in a city with everything laid on, you know, who hasn't experienced something like what we experienced here this summer, it'll be really hard for you to imagine. But when you see how fragile your systems are, how easy it is for your food to simply not get to the supermarket, you realize that it's not such a bizarre scenario. It's quite possible. I mean, we saw on the news the carcasses of the sheep and the cattle, you know, being dragged to be buried. Hundreds of thousands of these animals that we would have eaten. Now, of course, one of the great things you can do to help lower carbon emissions, and one thing that's really, really powerful, is stopping eating beef. So I've done that, definitely. Yep. Sorry, beef farmers. I'm gonna have to diversify. Find some other, you know, grow soybeans. Hate soybeans. Can't eat them. Anyway. So the good thing is there's lots of stuff online to help us envisage the future and find ways to build up our resilience and our family's resilience and ability to adapt to change. Anyway, that's it for now. That's how the Australian fires of 2019-2020 changed me.